The studio lights glared like tiny suns, reflecting off the polished floors and the wide, smiling faces of the audience. Laughter, applause, and chatter filled the room. It was just another daytime show, or at least, that's what everyone thought. Ellen DeGeneres leaned back in her chair, effortlessly charming the crowd, flipping between jokes and questions with the ease of a seasoned host. Her laughter was contagious, echoing through the cameras and over the millions watching at home. But something unusual was about to happen. Jonathan Roumie walked onto the set, calm and composed. No flash, no fanfare, just him, jeans, a simple shirt, and an aura that seemed to quiet the chaos around him. The crowd cheered politely, but something about his presence made the energy shift slightly. This wasn't just an actor on stage. This was someone whose very presence demanded attention without demanding it. The interview started like any other. Ellen asked about Jonathan's career, the role that made him famous, his latest projects. The audience clapped, some taking out their phones to capture the moment. Jonathan answered with his usual warmth, with a humility that contrasted the glitz of the show. His voice was calm, soft, yet carried weight, like a quiet river carving through stone. Then came the question that changed everything. "So, Jonathan," Ellen said, smiling, "you've played a very special role that's inspired a lot of people. But tell me, what really keeps you grounded? What keeps you centered?" Jonathan paused, looking thoughtful. For a moment, the audience leaned in without realizing it, sensing a shift in the energy. He didn't hesitate. He didn't preface his answer with jokes or clever quips. He simply said, with quiet sincerity, "My faith." There was a ripple in the room. A few polite chuckles, a soft murmur from the audience. "But Ellen," she laughed. It wasn't cruel, but it was dismissive, playful in tone, a laugh that implied disbelief. "Still very serious about that, huh?" she asked, half-smile, eyes twinkling. The audience laughed along, unsure if it was part of the show or genuine mockery. At that moment, most people expected Jonathan to blush, to laugh awkwardly, maybe even to make a joke to save the moment. But he did none of that. He smiled, yes, but it was not a smile for the cameras. It was a smile of peace, quiet confidence, the kind of smile that doesn't need validation. The laughter of the studio, the noise of the clapping hands, the shifting of chairs, it all seemed to fade slightly. Time felt like it slowed down, even for just a heartbeat. Everyone watching knew something had changed, though they couldn't yet put a finger on it. Ellen had laughed, the audience had followed, but there was a calmness in Jonathan, a certainty that could not be shaken. And then he spoke 6 words. 6 words that didn't just stop laughter, they stopped time. Those 6 words silenced the room. And no one in that studio on that day would ever forget what happened next. The cameras panned across the studio, capturing every inch of the colorful set, the bright lights, and the audience's eager faces. The energy was palpable, like the crackle before a storm. It was a Monday morning, and yet the room buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the low hum of anticipation. For Ellen DeGeneres and her team, this was just another episode. For the audience, another chance to see their favorite stars shine. But for Jonathan Roumie, the stage wasn't about applause, it was about truth. As Jonathan walked onto the set, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Where the studio was loud, bright, and flashy, he moved with calmness, almost like a quiet river flowing against a roaring waterfall. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wave dramatically or throw his arms in the air. His presence didn't demand attention, it drew it naturally. Jeans, a simple shirt, a pair of worn sneakers, nothing extravagant, nothing staged. Just a man who carried himself with quiet dignity. The audience applauded politely, some even whispered among themselves. They knew who he was, of course, they recognized him from The Chosen, the role that had touched millions around the world. But on this stage, in front of all the lights and cameras, he wasn't just an actor playing a part. He was someone who had lived a life of conviction, and that would become immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. Ellen started the conversation as she always did, with jokes. Her voice was warm, confident, and playful, carrying over the laughter of the audience. "Jonathan, you've become famous for playing a very special role. People love you for it. But tell me, what's it like, playing someone so perfect?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her smile hinting at mischief. Jonathan smiled politely. "It's been an incredible journey," he said, calm and measured. But it's never about perfection. It's about truth, about connecting with people, about showing something real that inspires hope. The audience nodded, some clapping softly, but the humor of the show had begun to shift the energy. Ellen leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with curiosity and amusement. "So what keeps you grounded, Jonathan?" she asked. "When the cameras stop, when the lights go down, what really centers you?" It was a simple question, but in that studio, simplicity often had weight. The audience leaned in, sensing something about to unfold. Jonathan took a breath, serene and unhurried. He didn't need to fill the silence with jokes or theatrics. He looked Ellen in the eye and answered truthfully. "My faith," he said, voice calm and steady. A ripple of reactions passed through the room. A few polite chuckles, some whispered comments from the audience, unsure how to respond. But then Ellen laughed. Not out of malice, but out of disbelief, playful, teasing, a laugh that seemed to challenge the very idea of taking faith seriously on live television. "Still very serious about that, huh?" she asked, her smile playful but edged with surprise. The audience followed her lead, laughter rising again, light and infectious. The room was filled with noise, but Jonathan's presence had begun to subtly shift it. Most people in that moment would have fumbled. They might have laughed nervously, offered an explanation, or even tried to joke their way out. Not Jonathan. He didn't flinch. He didn't shy away. He simply smiled, not for the cameras, not to ease the tension, but as if he already knew something the rest of the room didn't. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, yet it carried weight. The kind of weight that made people stop and reconsider. Laughter, applause, and chatter continued, but there was a subtle tension now, a quiet pause in the energy of the studio. Something had shifted. Something unseen was building, like the quiet pressure before a storm breaks. Jonathan's calmness wasn't passive, it was magnetic. People were drawn to it, even those laughing at his words. The audience couldn't quite explain why, but they felt compelled to listen more closely. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't showmanship. It was a quiet authority, a deep-rooted certainty that demanded respect without demanding it. Ellen's expression flickered. Her eyes briefly showed a flash of curiosity, of questioning, as if she suddenly realized this wasn't the usual light-hearted TV banter. The laughter that had filled the room was still there, but now it carried an edge of uncertainty. Something important was about to happen, though no one could yet see it clearly. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his gaze steady. He wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to prove a point. He wasn't even here to convince anyone. He was simply speaking the truth. And in the seconds that followed, the room would shift entirely, because soon he would speak 6 words that would silence the laughter, pause the cameras, and leave everyone in that studio forever changed. The studio lights were brighter now, almost harsh, as if illuminating every tiny shift in energy. Ellen's laughter still echoed, light and teasing, but there was an undercurrent, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but growing with each passing second. The audience was caught in a strange middle ground. Half were laughing with Ellen, swept up in her charisma, while others were quietly observing Jonathan, sensing that this was no ordinary interview. Jonathan Roumie sat calmly, his back straight, shoulders relaxed, yet every movement carried weight. He had just stated one simple truth, his faith, and the room had responded with disbelief, amusement, even gentle mockery. Most people in his position would have tried to explain, to justify, maybe even to joke to ease the tension. But Jonathan did none of that. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even appear defensive. He just remained composed, serene, unshakable. "Still very serious about that, huh?" Ellen repeated, leaning slightly forward, her eyes sparkling with playful challenge. The audience chuckled again, some clapping in amusement, thinking the moment was harmless entertainment. Others shifted in their seats, sensing that something deeper was unfolding. Jonathan's lips curved into a faint, calm smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile that invited laughter. It was the kind that commands attention without demanding it. He paused, letting the words linger in the air, the silence stretching just long enough to make the audience lean in instinctively. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the things that seem laughable are the very things that shape a life." There was a subtle murmur, the kind that spreads quietly through a crowd, as people began to notice the shift. The playful atmosphere was cracking. Ellen's eyes flickered, a shadow of doubt passing briefly over her usually confident expression. The audience, still smiling nervously, began to sense that the joke wasn't landing the way it had in their minds. She leaned back slightly, recovering quickly, still smiling, still poised, but there was now a tension in the room, a quiet anticipation. She tried to brush it off with humor, but Jonathan didn't give her the opening. He remained grounded, unshaken, the calm center of a growing storm. "People often laugh at what they do not understand," he continued. His voice was steady, measured, almost melodic, carrying a weight that drew attention without demanding it. "They mock what challenges their comfort, what questions their assumptions, what reminds them that life is bigger than themselves." A few people in the audience exchanged glances. The laughter that had been carefree moments ago began to falter. Whispers replaced clapping. Cameras panned subtly to capture the growing tension. The energy of the room had shifted entirely. What began as entertainment was now quietly profound. Ellen, sensing the subtle change, tilted her head. She had been a master at controlling the narrative on her shows, at guiding the audience's emotions, but something about Jonathan was different. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't about ratings or applause. This was about truth. The tension reached its peak as Jonathan leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "My faith saved my life." 6 words. 6 simple words. The studio fell silent. The laughter evaporated as if it had never existed. The audience froze, mid-clap, mid-whisper, unsure what to do next. Even the cameras seemed to pause, capturing the stillness. Ellen blinked, a momentary flush crossing her face. The realization struck, this was no casual statement, no soundbite for the evening. These words carried weight, history, experience, and authenticity. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The air felt heavier, charged with a mixture of respect, shock, and awe. The people who had laughed, unconsciously or otherwise, now felt the gravity of their reaction. Jonathan's calmness was not just serene, it was commanding. It demanded acknowledgement, not through force, but through presence. The audience began to murmur, softly at first, then louder as they processed the moment. Some whispered, "Wow," others shook their heads in disbelief. A few were wiping their eyes quietly, moved in ways they hadn't expected. The power of 6 words, spoken with sincerity and humility, had shifted the entire room. Even Ellen, seasoned, confident, and often unflappable, felt the weight of the moment. Her laughter had disappeared. Her smile was now thoughtful, almost reverent. The playful tone of the show had vanished entirely, replaced with a solemn awareness. The man she had laughed at was not only unshaken, but infinitely stronger than she had imagined. Jonathan Roumie remained seated, still calm, still collected, his presence unwavering. He didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. He had simply spoken his truth, and in doing so, had reminded everyone in that studio, and everyone watching at home, that respect, conviction, and faith are far more powerful than mockery or humor. The conflict had ended, not with argument, not with anger, but with quiet authority. And in the silence, the lesson was clear. Those who mock often underestimate the strength of those they belittle. For a moment, the studio was suspended in silence. The kind of silence that makes a person aware of their own heartbeat, their own breathing, the faint hum of the lights above. The 6 words Jonathan Roumie had spoken, "My faith saved my life," hung in the air, weighty and undeniable. They were simple, yet carried the power of a lifetime lived with conviction. Ellen blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Her playful smirk, the one that had elicited laughter from the audience just moments ago, faded into something more complex. Surprise, curiosity, even a flicker of respect crossed her face. The laughter had evaporated, replaced with a quiet tension she couldn't control. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on Jonathan, searching for a clue, a hint that this was part of a show, part of a script. But there was nothing artificial here. This was him. This was truth. The audience sat frozen, some with mouths slightly open, some holding phones halfway to their ears as if unsure whether to record or simply witness. The energy that had filled the room with light-hearted amusement now felt charged, almost sacred. People whispered to their neighbors, "Did he just say that?" And wow! The murmurs spread quietly at first, like ripples on water, until they became a wave of realization sweeping through the studio. A young woman in the front row, eyes wide, whispered, I think he means it." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but it carried across the aisle. Heads turned. People nodded. The laughter of a moment ago felt distant, replaced with a collective awe. Even the crew behind the cameras felt it. The stagehands, the lighting technicians, the sound operators, normally invisible in the magic of a live broadcast, paused. The world had shifted, even if just for a heartbeat. Ellen's expression softened. She was a master of timing and tone, someone who had navigated millions of live moments, yet here she was, caught in the gravity of honesty. Her eyes, usually sparkling with performance, now reflected introspection. The laughter she had shared with the audience felt different, almost awkward in the face of Jonathan's quiet authority. She realized the humor wasn't at his expense anymore. It had been a fleeting shield, one that Jonathan's calm presence had effortlessly dismantled. Jonathan remained seated, serene and composed. His hands rested lightly on his knees, his posture relaxed, but every inch of him radiated quiet strength. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. He simply existed in the moment, letting the weight of his words speak for themselves. And speak they did. The camera slowly panned across the audience. Faces showed disbelief, curiosity, and reflection. A man in the second row whispered, "I didn't expect that. He's unshakable." A teenager in the back, who had been snickering moments ago, now sat upright, eyes fixed, as if understanding something far beyond the surface of the interview. Even the laughter that had accompanied Ellen's reaction transformed. It softened, no longer mocking, but tentative and reverent. People were beginning to grasp that this was more than a soundbite or a performance. This was a lesson, a quiet but undeniable lesson about respect, courage, and the strength of conviction. An older man in the audience, leaning on a cane, murmured to his wife, "I've never seen anyone command a room like that, without shouting." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. The simplicity of Jonathan's words had stripped away the layers of pretense, leaving only truth in its raw, powerful form. Ellen's voice, usually commanding and playful, softened as she finally spoke, her tone different, more measured. "Jonathan, that was powerful." She paused, searching for words. The smile she offered now was no longer teasing, it was genuine, filled with respect. Jonathan nodded slightly, his gaze calm. He didn't need to explain further. The audience had already understood. The impact of those 6 words reverberated beyond the studio, beyond the cameras, beyond the broadcast. It wasn't just about faith, it was about integrity, courage, and the quiet authority of living one's truth. The energy in the room had transformed completely. Where there was once casual amusement, there was now reverent attention. Where there was light-hearted mockery, there was understanding. Where there had been performance, there was authenticity. And in that transformation, everyone present felt the subtle, powerful lesson. Words spoken with conviction, even quietly, can command more respect than 1,000 jokes. Jonathan Roumie remained composed, silent, and dignified. And as the murmurs of the audience began to rise into soft applause, it was clear. Laughter had been replaced with reflection, mockery had been replaced with respect, and a moment that could have been fleeting had instead become unforgettable. The applause in the studio started slowly, almost hesitantly at first, then grew stronger as the audience processed what had just happened. It wasn't the kind of applause that comes from excitement or humor, it was deeper, quieter, reverent. People were clapping because they had witnessed something rare, authenticity and courage delivered without a single raised voice. Ellen, still seated, took a deep breath, her usual sparkle now mingled with reflection. She had been the one to laugh, the one to set the room's light-hearted tone, but now the weight of the moment pressed on her. Her eyes met Jonathan's, and for the first time, she didn't see the actor who played a role. She saw a man of conviction, a man whose calm words carried the weight of lived experience. "Jonathan," she began, her voice softer than ever before, I didn't expect that. That was incredible." Jonathan smiled faintly, a quiet smile that didn't boast or seek approval. "Thank you," he said simply, letting the sincerity in his tone do all the work. He didn't need to elaborate. The truth in his words spoke for itself. The cameras captured every reaction in the studio. Faces reflected awe, curiosity, even a hint of guilt for those who had laughed earlier. Whispers spread quietly among the audience. He's incredible. I've never seen anyone like him." 6 words, and the room stopped. The murmurs weren't just about the words. They were about the presence, the calm authority, the humility behind them. Ellen leaned back, absorbing the atmosphere. The laughter that had once filled the room felt distant, almost irrelevant. The realization was clear. She had underestimated the power of quiet conviction. Here was a man who didn't need to shout, didn't need to perform, and didn't need to seek attention to command respect. The moment had transformed not just the studio, but everyone in it. Jonathan looked around, scanning the audience with a gentle, unwavering gaze. It was not judgmental, it was understanding. He had spoken his truth, and now he let the moment settle, allowing others to process it in their own way. No grand gestures, no dramatic flair, just the quiet impact of honesty lived fully. Then came the subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The audience began to lean forward in their seats, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and reflection. People who had laughed before now found themselves humbled. They realized that they had witnessed more than an interview. They had witnessed a lesson in respect, integrity, and courage. An older woman near the back whispered to her companion, "I've seen many actors, many public figures, but I've never seen someone command attention without demanding it. He doesn't perform, he is." Her companion nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. Even the crew behind the cameras felt it. The cameramen, producers, stagehands, they had seen hundreds of live shows, countless moments designed to shock, amuse, or entertain. But nothing had prepared them for the quiet intensity of Jonathan Roumie's presence, for the ripple effect of 6 simple words spoken with unshakable conviction. Ellen took another breath and addressed the audience, her tone reflective. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "we think power is loud. That strength comes from dominating a room or making people laugh. But today, we learned that true strength can be quiet. It can be simple. And it can be life-changing." The audience erupted into soft, genuine applause, this time without hesitation or laughter. It was heartfelt, reverent, and full of respect. Some even rose from their seats, clapping slowly, nodding in recognition of the weight of the moment. Cameras continued to roll, capturing every nuanced reaction, every quiet shift in emotion. Jonathan Roumie remained seated, composed, serene. He had not sought validation. He had not demanded recognition. And yet, in the silence that followed, in the applause that rose naturally, it was clear that he had earned something far more enduring than fame or applause: respect. The room had transformed. The laughter, the teasing, the casual mockery, they had all given way to understanding, reflection, and awe. A simple truth, spoken honestly, had shattered assumptions and left a permanent imprint on everyone present. And in that moment, it was clear. Jonathan Roumie's 6 words didn't just silence the room, they opened it, revealing a depth of courage and authenticity that would linger far longer than any joke or performance ever could. The studio had quieted to a rare stillness. Even the hum of equipment seemed muted, as if the building itself had paused to absorb the weight of what had just unfolded. The audience remained seated, many staring at Jonathan Roumie with a mixture of awe and reflection. Some faces were wet with tears, others thoughtful, but all carried the unmistakable imprint of witnessing something extraordinary. Ellen exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. For a moment, the playful, confident host who had laughed moments ago seemed replaced by a thoughtful observer, someone struck by the quiet authority of truth. She looked directly at Jonathan, her expression no longer teasing but respectful. "Jonathan, I can't tell you how much of an impact that was. I laughed at something I didn't understand, and I think the room just taught me a lesson." Jonathan's smile was soft, calm, and knowing. He did not scold. He did not chastise. He simply nodded, acknowledging both the moment and Ellen's humility. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We all have moments where we respond before we understand. The important thing is what we do next." The audience murmured agreement. Some clapped gently, still processing the shift in tone. Others whispered to neighbors, pointing out the subtle ways people had changed in the past few minutes. The laughter that had stopped, the faces that had softened, the awareness that something deeper had taken its place. A young man in the front row raised his hand hesitantly. I think I get it now. It's not about performance, right? It's about being honest, being true. Even if people laugh, even if they don't understand. Jonathan nodded, his eyes meeting the young man's, silently affirming that he had understood. Even Ellen leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I've hosted thousands of shows, Jonathan," she admitted. "And I've seen people say all sorts of things, some sincere, some not so much. But this was different. I can't explain it, but it felt like it landed here," she said, tapping her chest. The gesture was subtle, but the sincerity behind it resonated throughout the studio. Jonathan rose from his chair slowly, deliberately, his calmness filling the room like a tangible presence. He looked around, taking in the audience, the crew, Ellen herself. Faith, integrity, and respect aren't loud. They don't need to be proven in gestures or words that impress. They're lived quietly, humbly, and consistently. That is what leaves a mark, long after laughter fades. The words seemed to hang in the air, as if every person in the room absorbed them directly into their own consciousness. There was no need for applause, though the audience clapped anyway, softly at first, then louder, genuine and heartfelt. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. Recognition of a lesson taught without force, of a truth communicated without argument. Ellen smiled, her expression transformed completely. "Jonathan, you didn't just answer a question. You reminded all of us, myself included, about what really matters." "Thank you." He nodded humbly. "Respect isn't something we show only to those who agree with us, or those who amuse us, or those who have influence. It's something we show to everyone. Especially when no one is watching." The audience nodded, murmuring agreement, some wiping eyes, others simply breathing in the stillness. It was clear that the moment had changed them. Some had expected entertainment, but they had received a lesson in courage, faith, and dignity instead. Jonathan turned back toward the exit, pausing only to give Ellen a final nod of acknowledgement. She returned it, her earlier laughter replaced entirely by quiet reflection. The crew began to move, gently signaling the end of the segment, but the energy in the studio remained charged. As Jonathan walked toward the exit, he left more than just words behind. He left an impression of grace under scrutiny, calm under pressure, and integrity in the face of doubt. The lesson of those 6 words, "My faith saved my life," resonated far beyond the cameras, beyond the studio, and into the hearts of everyone present. For a brief, unforgettable moment, laughter and mockery had been replaced with reflection and respect. The conflict that had seemed so immediate and trivial had dissolved into understanding. And in that stillness, it was clear. Jonathan Roumie's quiet conviction had done more than silence a room, it had touched every soul in it. The studio had returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of cameras, the low murmur of crew members checking equipment, the soft shifting of audience members in their seats. Yet, even amid the ordinary motions of a live broadcast, something extraordinary lingered in the air. The 6 words Jonathan Roumie had spoken, "My faith saved my life," were no longer just words. They had become a quiet force, invisible but palpable, echoing in the minds of everyone present. Audience members sat in reflective silence, still digesting what had just happened. Laughter had vanished, replaced by a deeper awareness. The young man in the front row, who had earlier been unsure of what to make of Jonathan's calm, whispered again, "It's incredible how simple words can carry so much weight. He didn't shout, he didn't perform, and yet, he changed how I feel." Beside him, an older woman nodded solemnly, wiping a tear from her eye. "Respect," she murmured, "is earned quietly, not demanded loudly." Even Ellen, seasoned and quick-witted, sat back in her chair with an unusual softness. The sparkle in her eyes remained, but it was now tempered with humility. She had come prepared to entertain, to engage, to charm. Instead, she had witnessed a moment that transcended entertainment. She had laughed, yes, but that laughter had been replaced by introspection. And she knew, in that instant, that the lesson she had just seen would stay with her far longer than any punchline or joke ever could. Jonathan Roumie rose from his seat, calm and measured. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic flourish. He simply stood, his presence radiating quiet authority, humility, and conviction. He looked around the studio, his gaze meeting audience members, crew members, and Ellen herself. He didn't need to speak to make his message clear. His words, his demeanor, and the integrity behind both had already done the work. He finally spoke, softly but with unmistakable clarity, "Respect isn't something we show only to those who agree with us. It isn't something we show because it's convenient or because it earns applause. It's something we show consistently, to everyone, especially when no one is watching. The room absorbed the statement in silence. There was no laughter, no interruption, just a shared understanding that this moment was rare, a quiet lesson that demanded reflection. The audience, many of whom had come expecting entertainment, realized they had received something far more valuable, a glimpse of true strength. Strength that isn't loud or aggressive, but calm, steadfast, and deeply rooted in integrity. Jonathan's gaze softened as he continued, "Faith, conviction, and respect are quiet powers. They don't need to be flaunted or forced. They work silently, shaping the people around us, influencing lives, and leaving impacts far greater than any loud statement ever could." The subtle applause began again, this time slow and measured, like the gentle patter of rain on a roof. It was genuine, heartfelt, and reverent. The audience was no longer merely observing, they were participating in the acknowledgement of a lesson lived, not just spoken. Ellen joined in the applause, her expression one of genuine admiration and reflection, a silent acknowledgement that she, too, had been affected by the demonstration of quiet courage. Jonathan Roumie turned toward the exit, pausing for one final glance at the room. There was no need for fanfare, no need for dramatics. His message had been delivered. His truth had been witnessed. The impact of his presence and his 6 words would linger, not just for the viewers in the studio, but for anyone who heard this story later, online, in conversation, or through the echo of social media. And then, just before leaving, he offered one final thought, directed to everyone who had been listening: true power isn't shown through dominance or spectacle. True power is silent. True respect is earned, not demanded. And the way we treat others, every single day, in every moment, defines who we are more than any words ever could. The audience sat in reverent silence, letting the words sink in. Some wiped away tears, some nodded quietly, and some simply sat, absorbing the weight of a lesson that transcended laughter, entertainment, and spectacle. The cameras continued to roll, but the show had become something larger than its original purpose. It had become a testament to humility, integrity, and the quiet strength of living one's truth. As Jonathan finally exited the stage, the impact of that moment remained, palpable and unforgettable. It was a reminder that respect, humility, and authenticity are not performative, they are lived. That courage isn't loud. That strength doesn't need applause. And that even 6 simple words, spoken with truth and conviction, can silence an entire room, change a perspective, and leave an indelible mark on every heart in the audience. For anyone watching, anywhere in the world, the lesson was clear. Stand firm in your beliefs, treat others with respect, and live with integrity, even when no one is watching. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is true strength. And tell us where you're watching from, because every act of courage and authenticity deserves acknowledgement.